Meanwhile, we've been talking about the panhandling issue in Battle Creek at some length. City commissioners working to figure out how to give greater teeth to panhandling laws in our city so that we might address what has been recognized as something called aggressive panhandling. That is to say, folks who are more pushy and thus make a person feel ill at ease in the approach to that. And we've learned so far in our conversations that in Battle Creek, there is evidently at times a contingent of transient aggressive panhandlers who are not interested, we've learned, in being given food or spare change. They want the kind of money that folds, and they're going to be aggressive about getting it from you. And that has been an issue in Battle Creek, if not just downtown, in some other areas too. But the whole panhandling issue ends up being addressed in this whole thing. Case in point, last week we talked with the directors of the Share Center and the Haven of Rest, the day shelter and the evening shelter, and associated assistance programs. And really, when you ask those directors how they feel about this issue and whether or not there should be more teeth in the law, they say, we don't really know how that could be. How do you stop somebody's free speech ability to stand on the corner and say what they want and then ask you for money? That seems tough. You can see that interview, by the way. It's podcasted at WBCKFM.com. So with regard to that, we've asked West Michigan Attorney Rich Migala to talk to us a little bit about his legal perspective on this whole issue, and he joins us this morning. Good morning, Rich.
Good morning, Richard.
We appreciate your time today, as always.
Absolutely. Happy to help.
What's your general perspective on stuff like this? There have been some municipalities that have been able to enact various laws that have been able to allow police to target aggressive panhandlers and others. Is that sticky, though?
Very much so. Battle Creek, not Battle Creek, Grand Rapids, up until about 2013, had a panhandling law and were charging, I think, in the span of like 2 years, they charged 300 people with the offense. And it was finally struck down by a federal court, violating the free speech rights of the people soliciting funds. So it's a constant struggle. Our state legislature right now is looking at a bill to try to prohibit aggressive panhandling, and that's the problem. It's easy to prohibit someone from touching you as far as soliciting funds, but the sticky part comes in when they say that they want to prohibit someone from approaching you in an intimidating manner. Because what does that mean? That means so many different things to so many different people. Mm-hmm. Some people would be intimidated if anyone came within 5 feet of them and walking straight at them. Other people, aren't going to be intimidated until you get right in their face. So that's where things become a little bit sticky. The Attorney General chimed in
yes.
and wrote an opinion that he said the existing laws basically, as far as on a roadway, already addressed the issue. I'm not quite comfortable with his opinion, in my opinion.
Why not?
Well, basically, he cites two areas of the Motor Vehicle Code for Michigan. One is impeding the flow of traffic, which really is a general statute that, like if you're driving down the street and you stop and roll down your window to talk to someone on the side of the street, and you're keeping traffic from flowing behind you, you can be charged with impeding the flow of traffic.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it can also, a pedestrian can be charged with the same thing. Not only the person in the car, but the person leaning in the window talking to them could both be charged with impeding the flow of traffic. So the Attorney General says that same section of the Motor Vehicle Code could be used against panhandlers if they're like the ones that are on the exit ramps and entrance ramps, mm-hmm. and they're approaching traffic as the people are leaving the freeway. They could, if they slow that traffic down or stop that traffic, they could be charged with impeding the flow of traffic. There's another section of the Motor Vehicle Code that says a person is prohibited from standing in the roadway to solicit a ride, employment, or business. And if they do so, they're guilty of a civil infraction. And so that's the ones that, unfortunately, have caused a lot of the, like hook and ladders, the firefighters, and so forth that were soliciting funds by using the boot. Have now those municipalities have said, well, the Attorney General says we can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's an overly broad interpretation of what the statute says, number one. Number two, it just stops the person from standing in the roadway. There's nothing prohibiting the firefighters from standing on the sidewalk and soliciting the funds as long as they're not impeding the flow of traffic. In other words, only approaching when people are at the red light. So,
yeah, and
I get it.
It seems like this doesn't even address the aggressive part.
Exactly. So that's why, the state legislature right now is trying to struggle with that. Just what does that mean as far as what is aggressive panhandling? It's when someone won't take no for an answer, so that they come behind you and continue to pester you after you've told them no. That's where it's tough, because you have the right to for freedom of movement as long as they're not entrapping you. I think that if any law that says they can't follow you and still yell at you is going to be found to be unconstitutional. It's just freedom of speech. As long as they're not giving a reasonable person the impression that they're going to be assaulted or anything like that, I think that they can yell all they want. You see that all the time with the different protesters. So, and again, that's, panhandling is no different in the eyes of, I think, the Supreme Court than a protester.
West Michigan Attorney Richard Migala is talking to us a little bit about the legalities of potential laws directed at aggressive panhandling. We're talking this half hour with West Michigan Attorney Rich Migala about the idea of panhandling. And we suspected that this was tricky legally, and it sounds like it can be. We talked with the city attorney a few weeks ago, and that interview is available at WBCKFM.com for folks who might want to see it. And she cited those Grand Rapids, suburban Grand Rapids panhandling laws as having been now successful precedent. You pointed out that the Grand Rapids one was not. So some cities seemingly have been able to make this work.
Well, I think it just depends on if it's being addressed by like the American Civil Liberties Union coming forward and helping someone that gets charged with the offense, and then the municipalities and the legislature trying to, like the one in Grand Rapids was a criminal offense. It was a misdemeanor if you violated that ordinance. Where the legislature is now saying, well, I think what we'll do with this, and we'll make it a civil infraction.
Yeah.
So it's not really a crime, but then again, there's a fine associated with it. So you've got a homeless person that can't pay the fine. So then what happens? Well, most civil infractions, if you don't pay the fine, then they issue a warrant for your arrest when you don't appear for it.
Wow.
So even though it's a civil infraction, you can have a bench warrant issued for your arrest. So I think that there's still issues out there. Everyone's going to grapple with it. And so it just depends on the makeup of the courts as well. If the courts change, then their stance in certain areas change. So it's a flow. It's a changing flow, and it depends on how significant people perceive the problem to be as well.
Yeah, and of course the ACLU chimed in immediately on the Battle Creek stance as well. We presume that angle comes directly from the free speech perspective, right?
Correct. And again, it's people look at the protesters, or the courts look at the protesters, because you have aggressive protesters too for certain things that are hot button issues, and those people are enjoying the freedom of speech to allow them to be aggressive. And so some courts are saying, well, the panhandlers, even though it might be for a different purpose, have to be afforded that same protection.
Is it possible in the purview of the law to phrase it such that if the person who is the target of the panhandler simply feels intimidated, then that constitutes aggressive panhandling.
I mean, you can put that in a statute, but the problem is, how do you define intimidation? Again, it depends on the person. Some people feel intimidated, and you've seen it when you walk down a sidewalk. You'll see some people, if people push them from the other direction, they'll move over because they don't like someone brushing next to them or walking within 2 feet of them, even if they're passing them. So that person feels intimidated. Is that a reasonable interpretation of it, or is that a reasonable intimidation? I don't know.
Well, yeah, it's interesting because if you walk out of a building and it's dark and someone comes out from the shadows and panhandles aggressively, then, some of that is the circumstances. It's intimidating. And so if I'm the subject of that and I say I was intimidated, then perhaps that's all that might be needed to investigate further. But does it matter what a person's intimidation level is? If they feel intimidated, then maybe they are.
Yeah, well, and that's where the stickiness comes in, because if a statute or an ordinance is overly vague, then it becomes ripe for an argument that it's unconstitutional, because it captures too many people under too many circumstances. So you really got to try to tailor the ordinance to limit its enforcement to some degree. And
sure.
So whether it's by defining intimidation or aggressive stalking, and that's the effort that are being made right now, is to try how do we define what exactly is aggressive panhandling.
Attorney Richard Migala is here for a few more minutes. We'll take a short break and come back on WBCK. So if you were going to write the law, Rich, you talked about this before the break, that if the law is written too broadly, then it's up to challenge. It stands more vulnerable. If you were going to write it, how would you write it?
Boy, that's a good question. I mean, I obviously, if there's any physical contact, I think that would stand muster. I think if you might stand a better chance if you had in there a provision that said that if you've already expressed that you have no interest in contributing to this person, and they continue to hound you, so to speak, walk after you and keep asking for money and that. So then you get into a harassment. I think that might stand muster. But that's really going to be about it. I mean, I think it's going to be physical contact and or continued harassment.
So one could feel intimidated short of that, but there has to be something more aggressive than that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, because again, just someone's, I mean, if they stand in your way, and you have to go around them, I don't think that the charging them is gonna fly. I think that again, now if they move with you and again trap you, then I think that there's some grounds to go ahead and charge them with aggressive panhandling. So I would struggle as much as the municipality struggle with how do you write this thing.
Right. Well, and then of course the challenge that might ensue, but I suppose if there is a problem with this and there's not a lot of teeth to help move it along, then they got to try.
Well, exactly. I mean, when the problem, and you're seeing more and more of it, and I suspect some of it, some of the people that declare that they're homeless aren't. So I don't know if you can charge a person false advertising or fraud.
Yeah.
Can you charge a person with fraud if they're, basically they're almost like a charitable giving, and it turns out they're not deserving of the charity.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, and we've certainly heard about that the assertion has been made that some of those folks who are, at the corner there holding up a sign, walk off and get into their cars and drive home and make a living at this.
Or when you see one on one side of town that they say they're homeless, but then the next day or a couple days later they're on the other side of town 10 miles away.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, how did you get over there in that homeless state?
Right. Yeah, interesting. Well, it'll be interesting to see how this sorts out. We appreciate your viewpoint.
Absolutely. Have a wonderful week.
You too. Rich Migala, West Michigan attorney on WBCK.